In the parking lot of Portland Art Museum, my wife adjusted my tie and met my gaze sternly. "Leland," she said, "there's something crucial you should comprehend before we enter. Tonight is significant. Tonight isn't for your anecdotes about fieldwork in Sudan or random dinner topics. Just keep smiling, hold your drink, and let me manage everything." I examined her. At 47, Cordelia, dressed in a gown more expensive than my first car, her immaculately styled dark hair giving the appearance of being painted on. Her beauty was almost overwhelming, and she seemed to regard me as an unsolved issue. "Remain at the back," she added casually. "Don't cause any embarrassment." She then adjusted her lipstick in a parked Merced's reflection, clicked her heels towards the elevator, and departed, leaving me standing there in a rented tuxedo, holding a parking ticket I didn't know how to handle. This was on October 11th, 7 months ago. Inside that building's walls, the arrival of the guest of honor transformed not only my marriage, but also my understanding of myself. My name is Leland Ashworth. I am 56 years old. After spending 22 years working in humanitarian aid, primarily in East Africa and Southeast Asia, a torn Achilles and burnout led me to return permanently to Portland. Now I work part-time for a nonprofit in the Pearl District, usually starting my days sipping coffee on my back porch, enjoying views of the Willamette River while attempting to reconcile myself with tranquility. Cordelia and I have been married for 14 years. We crossed paths at an appropriate gathering. She was the event director for Hargrove Capital, a mid-sized wealth management firm, and I was the keynote speaker, still half jet-lagged and wearing a shirt purchased in Nairobi's airport. She found me captivating, much like some fine antique buildings, alluring yet unsuitable for habitation. We still chose to wed for quite some time. Our arrangement proved functional. She was orderly, ambitious, well-connected. I was cosmopolitan, carefree, eager to be by her side. Despite our language barriers at times, we complemented each other perfectly. Then she ascended to the position of Senior Partner Relations Director, and matters began to change. The new role introduced a distinct circle of social acquaintances, formal galas, charity events with black-tie dress codes, and dinners where the menu didn't display prices. Cordelia navigated these gatherings gracefully, as if destined for them. In contrast, I wandered through them like a lost soul, acknowledging others appropriately while my memory faltered in recalling names shortly after their introductions. She began criticizing me publicly, initially over trivial matters. Initially, it was Leland represented the opposite charity, not this one. "Leland, let's steer clear of the political disputes tonight." Over time, corrections grew sharper, and a new behavior emerged, isolating me at social gatherings, guiding me towards bars or restrooms while she networked, diminishing my presence to magnify hers. I justified this to myself, claiming indifference, fatigue, and irrelevance due to retirement. Yet I'm not proud of that. On October 11th, in a parking garage, I was instructed to remain hidden lest I embarrass her. Before moving forward, if this resonates with you, please subscribe, like, and share your location. Let me know I'm not alone. We will face this challenge together. The Portland Art Museum Gala was hosted by the Pacific Northwest Cultural Foundation on the upper floor of its main building, offering a view of the North Park blocks. For centuries, I've strolled by those blocks countless times, with their unkempt elm trees, dog walkers, and chess enthusiasts on benches. Yet from above at night, adorned with fairy lights and a jazz quartet, Portland acquired an air of refinement. The event was the foundation's yearly charity function, but this time it held more significance. The organization's long-term main benefactor, a man known as Douglas Crane, had recently transferred his stake in the foundation to a private investor. Reports suggested that the new owner was arriving from New York for this gathering. Few details were available about her, merely that she was wealthy, serious, and held strong views regarding the foundation's administration. Cordelia had been cultivating this relationship for 4 months. The new investors had been in discussions with Hargrove Capital concerning potential portfolio services, and tonight presented an opportunity to make a lasting impact. Cordelia had prepared her arguments and purchased a new dress. She had her assistant investigate the investor's well-known preferences and philanthropic background. She hadn't shared any information about the investor with me, which I assumed was because she didn't think it necessary for my knowledge. The room held approximately 300 people, many of whom I recognized from Portland's relatively small social circle. Despite its size, I found myself surrounded by individuals accustomed to wealth, much like I once was in refugee camps. Their familiarity with opulence had rendered them oblivious to its extremity. As instructed by Cordelia, I kept to the outskirts of the gathering. I requested a glass of sparkling water and watched as the jazz quartet played a piece reminiscent of Bill Evans interpreting an unidentified song. I engaged in conversation with a retired judge named Fletcher who expressed enthusiasm about salmon fishing on the Deschutes River, and I found myself truly enjoying this discussion. Indeed, Fletcher was one who spoke passionately about subjects he cherished. Without making an impression on you, when the room subtly altered, it wasn't due to a sound or announcement. Instead, it was that unmistakable shift in atmospheric pressure that signals the arrival of someone eagerly anticipated by the room. Eyes turned, conversations halted, even the jazz quartet seemed to diminish. I, too, turned with everyone else. The air left my lungs. She was approximately 60 or 62 years old, towering, possessing a posture that suggested either military school or an unyielding life. Her silver hair was closely cropped, and she wore a deep navy suit, not a gown but a suit, accessorized with a single strand of expensive pearls. She arrived accompanied by two younger assistants, present to manage her schedule, not her. Yet this was not what caused my breath to leave me. It was her face that I recognized, not from pictures or articles, but in a way you'd recognize a familiar landscape, instinctively, intimately. Structural features, jawline angle, eyes reflecting a specific radiance I'd seen just once in my life, in a mirror every morning. She navigated the room with her attendants, acknowledging greetings, shaking hands with an economy of motion characteristic of someone who avoids waste. I watched as she worked the crowd and found myself unable to move. Fletcher was talking about dry flies, but I couldn't catch a single word. And then she halted. At a distance of around 30 feet, amidst a handshake with the Foundation's top executive, she paused mid-motion and turned her gaze towards me. The duration is uncertain. It could have been 3 seconds, but it felt like standing on a precipice. Then she spoke to her assistant, who nodded, and she began walking towards me, disregarding the executive director she had been greeting and a city council member waiting to introduce himself. Beyond Cordelia, who stood 12 feet distant with a partly outstretched hand in greeting past them all. Straight towards me she strode, and upon drawing near enough for clear eye contact, an unexpected sight met mine. Her eyes were filled, not in tears of breakdown or spectacle, but as if witnessing something long thought unattainable. In a voice scarcely above a whisper, she revealed, "I've been searching for you for 28 years. From somewhere within the room echoed the sound of glass shattering against marble. I turned to find Cordelia standing motionless, gazing at us, her shattered champagne glass at her feet. Born Nadia Reyes in Portland, Oregon in 1964, she was known as Nadia Whitmore following her second marriage. But this was the name of the woman now before me. In John's community, a woman with roots tracing back to a Puerto Rican father and an Irish-American mother who had spent 2 decades transforming scant resources. At the gala, I didn't discover any of this information. That night, all I recognized was that she stood before me, her composure partially restored, and she said, "You resemble him precisely, identically. It's as if a photograph came to life." "Who do I resemble?" I inquired. "My half-brother," she replied. His name was Raymond. Then an aide appeared at her side, softly saying, "Ms. Whitmore, the Foundation director is—" "I know," she responded, not diverting her gaze from me. After 5 minutes, she spoke to me again. "Will you still be here in an hour when the speeches are concluded?" "I won't be leaving," I assured her. I meant it more sincerely than I had for years. Cordelia approached me approximately 4 minutes after Nadia walked away. Cordelia, with calculated fury, moved gracefully but held back until she could find privacy. Stopping before me, she glanced towards Nadia and then returned her gaze to me. "What was that?" she whispered. "She thought she recognized me," I replied. "She saw you," Cordelia stated, her tone expressionless. "Leland, the woman we're here for tonight is Nadia Whitmore. Are you aware of your actions just now?" She passed by me, ignored me, moved past Councilmember Patterson and even the executive director to stand before you. "I am," I answered. "But why does Nadia Whitmore know who you are?" "She doesn't," I said. "That's odd. She believes I resemble someone else." Cordelia fixed me with a steady stare for a moment. She grabbed a fresh champagne glass from an approaching tray, sipped calmly, and warned, "Stay ready, and above all, don't disclose your nonprofit work until I've had a chance to present myself adequately. She must not discover our connection before I establish the context." She then left to handle matters with the foundation director, leaving me in confusion. The secret she was unaware of, the information I hadn't shared because there didn't seem to be a need to, and because it becomes something you learn to keep private over time, is that I was adopted. As an infant, I was adopted by a couple named Howard and Patricia Ashworth from Lake Oswego, Oregon. Howard was a civil engineer, while Patricia taught 4th grade. They were good, reliable individuals who loved me wholeheartedly without making me feel incomplete. I never felt the need to find my biological family. I convinced myself it was due to my admiration for the life the Ashworths had crafted for me. However, the reality, if I'm truthful, was that I was apprehensive about what I might uncover. After the speeches concluded, Nadia Whitmore's aide approached me. "Ms. Whitmore wishes to confer with you in private. A side gallery has been set aside," he informed me. I followed him through a pair of glass doors, along a brief hallway adorned with Pacific Northwest landscape photography, into an empty gallery. 2 chairs were positioned near the window, and Nadia was already seated in one. She held a glass of water, no wine. She seemed steadier now, more poised, though her composure appeared recently constructed. "Take a seat," she instructed. "Please," I obliged. "I owe you an explanation," she began, possibly accompanied by an apology for the commotion. "There was no commotion," I said. "You were quite gracious." She almost smiled. My assistant would likely dispute this. She placed her water glass aside and met my gaze squarely. "You're aware you were adopted?" It was not a query. "Yes," I responded. "Have you uncovered any information about your biological kin?" "No, the adoption was sealed. I didn't make an effort to reopen it." She gave a slow nod, suggesting she anticipated my response. "My father's name was Gabriel Reyes. He hailed from Ponce, Puerto Rico, and migrated to Portland in 1958 at the age of 19. He spent most of his life working construction. He wasn't a religious man." She spoke these last words straightforwardly, without remorse. "He fathered 3 children with my mother, and for much of our existence we thought they were all of his offspring. However, upon his death in 1994, we discovered letters, documents, and another name." Reaching into the small handbag on the windowsill, she retrieved a photograph. She held it briefly before passing it to me. It was a black and white image, worn at one corner. A 23-year-old man, standing on a familiar street with the St. John's Bridge in the backdrop and Mount St. Helens visible on clear days, was laughing off camera. He wore a plaid shirt and work boots. His facial features were strikingly similar to mine. The same jawline, eyes, and posture when comfortable, slightly weighted to the left with loose hands by his sides. Nadia informed me that his name was Raymond Reyes, her half-brother from her father's previous relationship before their parents married. Born in 1966 to Susan Callow, he was given up for adoption just 2 months after birth. Tragically, Raymond died in a car accident in 1989 at the age of 22. At the time of his death, he had been married for 14 months. His wife was pregnant when he passed away, giving birth to their son Leland in the spring of 1990. Nadia had spent years and a significant amount of money to trace the closed court records to find the baby's name on the birth certificate. 28 years passed since Raymond's wife remarried, Nadia mentioned. She relocated. The documentation became convoluted, and then Howard and Patricia Ashworth filed for legal adoption, stalling the search. After a pause, it was shared that 3 different investigators had been employed over this period. The last one managed to uncover a sealed record 6 months ago, but confirmation took until this month. The photograph remained in my grasp. I couldn't tear my gaze away from it. "I have an uncle," I announced at last. It seemed unusual to utter such words. It didn't feel authentic. "I have 2 cousins," she clarified. "They are Elliot's children and reside in Bend. Elliot is 64. He wept when I informed him that we had located you." She paused. "It needs to be made clear. There's no expectation from you in this matter. This isn't about the foundation or business or anything related. I want you to comprehend this clearly. I attended this gathering because it was previously scheduled and I don't renege on commitments. Discovering you, it's something I've yearned for a long time. I'm not here to add complexities to your existence. I was pondering about Cordelia, orchestrating the story in another room. I was contemplating my father, Howard Ashworth, who taught me how to change a tire in the rain and always made me feel like I belonged right where I was. I remembered a youth named Raymond, standing on a bridge in St. John's with a mountain as his backdrop, laughing at something unknown. "You're not making my life harder," I stated. "I spent more than an hour at the gallery." This is evident as I returned to the main room to find the jazz quartet replaced by a string ensemble. and most of the appetizer stations cleared. Cordelia was near the bar conversing with the Foundation's board chair, and upon seeing me enter, she broke away and swiftly moved across the room, exhibiting the determined stride of someone who has been waiting long enough and is no longer waiting. "Where have you been?" she asked, speaking with Nadia Whitmore. Her facial expressions changed swiftly. "For an hour," she inquired, to which you replied affirmatively. "Cordelia," she breathed. She paused, then asked, "Are you aware of the impression this gives? Leaving a crowd, including acquaintances, to engage privately with your spouse and you for an hour isn't helping me manage the situation's appearance tonight, and I can't if you're isolated with—" "She's my aunt," you responded. Cordelia halted. "My father was Raymond Reyes," you disclosed. "He passed away in 1989. He was Nadia Whitmore's half-brother, and I only learned this about 45 minutes ago." Despite the background chatter and soft melodies from the ensemble, Cordelia gazed at me with a previously unseen expression, having known her visage for 14 years. It was a revelation that revealed a misconception about her lineage. "You're adopted," she admitted. "Yes, I knew that." "No, you didn't. I thought I did. Leland, this woman is among the wealthiest private investors on the West Coast. Can you comprehend what you're implying? You're saying you're her relative," I clarified. "I'm saying I'm her relative," she contemplated me. "This alters things," she reflected. It wasn't accusatory, it was more of a contemplation. She was reevaluating. I could see the mental recalculations. "Yes," I agreed. "It does." I then left to find Fletcher, who continued discussing the Deschutes River, and I stood with him, really listening this time, and pondered over what Nadia had said as we separated in the gallery. She had shaken my hand, and unexpectedly she did something more. She'd held it for a moment, much as Patricia Ashworth would cradle my face when I was ill as a boy, as if it were precious. "Your father would have been pleased," she'd remarked. "All that I comprehend about your accomplishments in your work, the years you spent abroad, he would have appreciated it. Raymond shared that trait too, the desire to be significant." Unable to respond at the time, I merely nodded. Yet, as Fletcher described the resonance of the river in late September, thoughts returned to that moment, and a sensation that had been tightly knotted within my chest for a prolonged period began to unwind, ever so slightly. The weeks following the gala were among the most peculiar of my life. Nadia initiated formal correspondence through her lawyer first. She was methodical in this regard, preferring everything to be well documented, wishing me ample time and information before I needed to address anything. The letter detailed information regarding Raymond, his relationship with my mother Susan, the family's investigation. It contained duplicates of records and a photo of Raymond's grave in Multnomah Park Cemetery, merely a short drive from my home. On the subsequent Saturday morning, I ventured to this location. In the rain, it was Portland, October. Predictably, it was raining. Before a humble granite headstone bearing, Raymond Gabriel Reyes, 1966-1989, cherished son and spouse, stood empty. No blossoms adorned the site. I had no companionship. For an extended period, I remained there. I was uncertain about what emotions I sought, perhaps a sense of resolution or a connection. Instead, I experienced something more rudimentary and peculiar. It was as if I had verified something that I had long suspected but never managed to define. That there was a narrative I originated from, that an individual existed who contributed to my existence. I hadn't always felt like an entity that materialized out of thin air in my moments of despair. I had a father who died prematurely and never knew of my existence. Yet he was real. He stood on the St. John's Bridge, laughed at a mystery I would never uncover, and passed something within his blood and restlessness, a desire to be where things mattered. This legacy, though never met by him, seemed to embrace me as I stood in the rain. Exactly 3 weeks later, I had coffee with Elliot Reyes. He journeyed from Bend, and we convened at Kova, a place on Burnside with 40-foot-high ceilings and the finest single-origin Ethiopian coffee I've tasted. We spent 3 hours there as Portland continued outside the windows. Elliot is a large man with gray hair and laugh lines, so deep they resemble topographic maps. For the initial 5 minutes, he gazed at me from across the table without uttering a word, then commented, "You have Raymond's hands." I responded affirmatively, mentioning his long fingers. He shared that Raymond had difficulties with construction work because of his concern for his hands. Elliot chuckled, his laugh easy and uncomplicated, a trait that used to drive our father up the wall. If Raymond had wanted to, he could have pursued a career in construction, as the pay was decent. However, it wasn't his calling. It seemed he wanted to teach, perhaps high school history. He was often seen reading, Our conversation veered towards Raymond and Nadia. Elliot spoke of Nadia with evident admiration and a brotherly mix of tolerance and exasperation, a blend I recognized as love. We also discussed his children, Petra and Cole, who were in their late 20s and apparently became curious about me upon hearing mention of my name, inquiring when they could visit Portland. At one point, Elliot delicately asked about my marriage situation. I hesitated before replying, "It's complex." He gave a knowing nod, indicating that the implication held more weight than complexity. Cordelia and I hadn't been quarreling per se. Instead, we had purposefully shied away from the straightforwardness of a fight. What transpired between us was subtler and potentially more harmful. We danced around each other cautiously within our shared space, articulating words that conveyed little meaning, while overlooking the underlying issue beneath the surface. The gala served as a catalyst. It wasn't primarily Nadia who caused the rupture. Rather, it was fresh information on top of an existing problem. The fault line had been there for some time. I simply hadn't wanted to confront it head-on. However, after standing in the rain at Raymond's grave, after spending 3 hours with Elliot at Cova, and after learning about my inherited traits, I found myself unwilling to maintain the charade. One evening in November, I prepared dinner, nothing extravagant. Pasta dinner, salad, a long-saved bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir. When Cordelia entered from work, the meal was already set on the table, prompting me to ask her to take a seat. She glanced at the meal, then at me. She placed her bag aside. "What's this?" she asked. "Dinner," I replied, "and a conversation I should have initiated a year ago." She sat. We ate in quiet contemplation rather than hostility for some time, and then I spoke up. Not about Nadia or the gala, but about us. About that moment in the parking garage when I was told to stay at the back and not embarrass her. About the gradual accumulation of similar incidents. About how I had spent 3 years shrinking myself, unsure whether it was to shield her or to evade the discomfort of acknowledging that something was amiss. Cordelia, seldom moved to tears, sat facing me with her wine glass in hand, listening intently. She remained silent for a considerable duration after I finished speaking. "I hadn't realized it," she admitted eventually, "or perhaps I knew, but I convinced myself it was in your best interest, that those situations made you uneasy, that you preferred to stay on the outskirts, yet I suspect—" She paused and started again. "I suspect I desired control over you, and that's not right for a spouse." I conceded, "No, it isn't." "I won't pretend I didn't also consider the business aspects," she revealed later. I acknowledged her candor. "Cordelia is truthful when she chooses to be, but there's more to it. I've been frightened, Leland. You returned from years abroad, and you are extraordinary. You rescued people from camps. You negotiated with armed individuals in 3 languages, and then you came back here and allowed me to treat you like an item of furniture. I didn't comprehend why. My feelings for you diminished, which I recognize as counterintuitive, yet it occurred. That comment struck an awkward chord. I was exhausted," I admitted. "I returned home because I was fatigued and desired some guidance for a while. I believe I entrusted you with the reins only to resent you for seizing them." "We're in disarray," she acknowledged. "We're in disarray," I concurred. She topped off our wine glasses. "I'd like to meet Nadia," she suggested. "Assuming it's suitable if she consents." "She will," I replied. "She's already shown interest in you." Cordelia regarded me for a while. "What did you disclose about me?" "I informed her you were complex," I admitted. "And that I was, too. I won't tell you everything sorted itself out neatly. Real situations don't sort themselves out neatly. What I can assure you is this." In December, Nadia Whitmore returned to Portland without her assistance, and the trio dined at Ox on Northeast MLK, a restaurant specializing in Argentine wood-fired cuisine that maintains an ambience warm and boisterous enough for less complicated evenings. Initially cautious with each other, Nadia and Cordelia were like 2 meticulous women evaluating their circumstances. However, following the second glass of wine, Nadia recounted a tale about Raymond, causing such laughter that I nearly upended the breadbasket, and observing my laughter, Cordelia's countenance changed in a way that had been long desired. It softened. In January, Petra and Cole arrived. We visited Powell's books. If you become family residing in Portland, visiting Powell's books is mandatory. That's simply the rule. For 2 hours, Petra and I wandered different floors and eventually met at the coffee shop in the center. Petra is earning her Ph.D. in environmental science at University of Oregon, while Cole manages a craft distillery in Bend. His views on local grain often prompt his father's eye roll, a reaction born from hearing these opinions too frequently. Both are friendly, intelligent, and occasionally contentious, much like individuals who have been allowed to argue as a family tradition. They already seem acquaintances I've known for more time than I actually have. Elliot and I now have Sunday morning phone calls as a routine. He's teaching me about fishing on the Deschutes. My attempts to educate him on technology are met with his description of it as fighting a war with a hammer, a sentiment that amuses me greatly. Nadia and I exchange emails. She prefers written communication, and her messages are comprehensive, thoughtful, and occasionally include pictures. Recently, she shared a photo of the plaid shirt from Raymond's image with me. She discovered it among his possessions that she had kept. She inquired if I desired it. I agreed. It arrived in a padded envelope wrapped neatly in tissue paper. It fits, albeit snugly since Raymond was slimmer than I am. The following morning, I wore it to Kova, sitting at the same table where I once had coffee with Elliot, and sipped my Ethiopian single origin while watching Portland carry on its daily routine, contemplating the unique contour of what I'd received. Not a resurrection, not a chance to make amends. Raymond will not return. 28 years still equate to 28 years of uncertainty. There is no reversing that. However, there is this. A woman in a navy suit who crossed a room filled with influential individuals to stand before a stranger she didn't know, moved by her recognition of someone she had been missing for most of her life. There exists a photograph of a young man on a bridge, grinning widely. A plaid shirt carries a faint scent of cedar and old paper. At a restaurant in northeast Portland, three individuals who could have been uncomfortable together instead discovered reasons to laugh. There's Cordelia, not fixed, neither am I. We are two individuals engaged in the slow, imperfect process of consciously choosing each other. Yet we paused last week in the kitchen and admitted, I was mistaken in what I said in the parking garage. I've been wrong about many things. And I'll strive to be less wrong. It wasn't poetry, but it was real. In my Portland, Oregon kitchen under the late afternoon light, I realized, this is why I returned home, not tranquility, not peace. This, the authentic, challenging, essential things. Occasionally, you don't search for your story, it finds you. Occasionally, your life story intersects with events in a museum surrounded by people, clad in a rented tuxedo. At times, it's serendipity that finds you, a connection that has been flowing throughout the world for unknown reasons, coursing through the veins of an unaware half-brother or the determination of a woman who never abandoned her search, waiting for a fateful, gracious, and desperate moment to reveal itself. I am Leland Ashworth, born to Raymond Reyes, a man whose existence had impact and left a trace, even if he wasn't aware of it. I am also the nephew of the formidable Nadia Whitmore, as well as the cousin of Petra and Cole, who are more intelligent than they give themselves credit for. Lastly, I remain married to Cordelia, a woman who is complex, meticulous, occasionally frustrating, but currently in another room, laughing at something I cannot hear on the phone. The genuine laughter, scarcely heard these days, is something I'm making an effort to experience more frequently. The narrative revolves around Leland, who spent decades shrinking himself for someone who should have uplifted him, and the transformation happened when he stopped, stood tall, and allowed truth to catch up with him. Here's my take on it. True connections will find you if you let them. However, you must first step out of the shadows. Stop feeling guilty about occupying space. Stop allowing others to dictate your presence in a room. There may be someone searching for you specifically who has been seeking you for 28 years, and you wouldn't want to be so far back that they can't see your face.